not be your biological father. But say for the past 40 years, you were told Mr. Smith was her father.
I heard a relative say that that's not none of your father. So I started questioning. He said, you will always be my daughter. I believe in my heart that you are, and no matter what, you'll always be my daughter, one or the other. And me and Mr. Smith don't have the same blood type. Mr. Ware is your father. She said, you walk like him, you chuckle like him. She said, if I close my eyes, and I'm looking in the baby book, and there's relatives of Mr. Ware's family that signed in. They had the
relatives of Mr. Ware.
Yes, Your Honor.
Have signed into your baby book when you were born. But you do not believe you're her biological father.
No, I do not. When she became pregnant, she explained to me that she was, and that it was another man's child. At that time, being, I believe, around 15, 16 years old, I didn't know anything about timelines.
So you just took her word for it?
Yes.
This courtroom story unfolds under the authority of Judge Lauren Lake, where emotions, history, and legal responsibility collide on the evidence stage. The case centers on long-standing doubt, fractured relationships, and the powerful role a DNA test plays in answering questions that have haunted families for decades. From the very beginning, it becomes clear that this is not just a legal proceeding, but a deep examination of identity, trust, and the relationship between law and justice. Multiple individuals arrive in court, each carrying their own version of the truth. At the center is a woman seeking clarity about her biological father after years of confusion. She explains how she was raised believing one man was her father, a man who paid child support and stood by her emotionally, yet lingering questions never fully disappeared. Over time, inconsistencies began to surface. Family remarks, blood type differences, old memories, and unresolved conversations that refused to stay silent. These doubts eventually led her to Paternity Court, where only scientific evidence could provide final answers. Judge Lauren Lake carefully listens as each person takes the stand. One man acknowledges a past relationship with the woman's mother, but firmly believes he was told decades ago that he was not the father. Another man, who has financially supported the child for years, explains how he accepted responsibility believing it was the right thing to do, despite later realizing that timelines and facts did not align. This creates a legal and emotional dilemma that highlights the concept of justice in jurisprudence, doing what is morally right versus what is biologically true. As testimony continues, the court hears how rumors, adoption stories, and family secrets shaped decisions that altered lives forever. The mother is brought into court to explain her actions and decisions from years earlier. Her testimony introduces contradictions that complicate the case even further, raising serious questions about credibility and the impact of misinformation. Judge Lake emphasizes how truth in the courtroom is not based on emotion, but on verifiable facts, reminding everyone that evidence must lead the way. When the DNA test results are finally revealed, they shock everyone present. Neither alleged father is biologically related to the woman. The courtroom reacts with disbelief and sorrow. The result demonstrates why people regret taking a DNA test, not because the truth is wrong, but because it permanently changes everything. The emotional fallout illustrates how truth changes everything, even when the answers bring pain instead of closure. Despite the disappointment, the woman finds strength in acknowledging the man who raised her, reinforcing that biology does not always define family. The story then transitions into another courtroom matter involving a broken engagement, alleged infidelity, and doubts surrounding a child's paternity. This divorce case introduces a different dimension of courtroom drama, where a man demands a DNA test after discovering that his fiancé cheated around the time of conception. The emotional weight is heavy, as he explains past trauma from a previous relationship where a similar situation ended in heartbreak. His fear is not just about paternity, but about trust, loyalty, and whether a relationship can survive uncertainty. Judge Lauren Lake guides both parties through the timeline, carefully examining the window of conception. The mother admits to cheating once and expresses deep remorse, stating that guilt consumed her until she finally confessed. The courtroom becomes a platform where personal accountability meets legal scrutiny, reflecting the relationship between law and justice. The man's request for a DNA test is not portrayed as cruelty, but as a desperate need for certainty in order to move forward. The DNA results reveal that the child is indeed his biological son. Relief floods the courtroom, but the case does not end there. A lie detector test is introduced to address lingering doubts about repeated infidelity. When the results confirm that the cheating occurred only once, the moment becomes a turning point. This segment mirrors themes often discussed in relationship-focused content such as the Truth Changes Everything podcast, the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, and Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where honesty, accountability, and evidence offer a path to healing. Another complex case follows, involving multiple women, overlapping relationships, and child support disputes. The courtroom becomes a reflection of how chaos arises when responsibility is avoided. A married man stands accused of fathering children with more than one woman, while denying accountability at every step. The women involved express anger, betrayal, and emotional exhaustion, each fighting for recognition, stability, and justice for their children. This situation highlights adverse inference in Evidence Act principles, as Judge Lake weighs credibility against documented facts and scientific proof. As DNA test results are revealed one by one, the truth dismantles lies that had been maintained through denial and manipulation. Judge Lauren Lake makes it clear that legal responsibility cannot be escaped by avoidance or arrogance. The court addresses not only paternity, but also the long-term consequences for children who are caught in adult conflicts. The rulings reinforce why Supreme Court child support principles exist, to protect the innocent and enforce accountability. Throughout the proceedings, themes of DNA test cheating stories, adoption stories, full episodes, and evidence-based justice are woven naturally into the narrative. Each case demonstrates how courts function as a last resort when private conversations fail and trust collapses. The courtroom becomes a place where truth is not optional, and where science speaks louder than emotion. By the end of this powerful courtroom story, it becomes evident that a DNA test is never just a test. It is a reckoning. Some participants leave with relief, others with heartbreak, but all leave changed. Judge Lauren Lake closes each case by reminding those involved that while the court can determine facts, healing and growth must happen outside the courtroom. This story ultimately shows that justice is not always comforting, but it is necessary. In every case, the evidence stage exposes realities that can no longer be ignored. Whether through regret, redemption, or responsibility, the truth asserts itself, proving that in matters of family, law, and identity, the truth always arrives, even when it hurts the most. As the courtroom proceedings continue, Judge Lauren Lake reinforces that every case brought before her carries long-term consequences far beyond the walls of the court. What unfolds is not entertainment, but a real-life examination of responsibility, truth, and the legal standards that exist to protect children and families. Each new matter builds upon the same central question. When doubt enters a relationship, how far must people go to uncover the truth? In the next phase of the story, attention shifts to how DNA testing has become one of the most powerful tools in modern family court. Judge Lake explains through her rulings that a DNA test is not meant to punish, but to clarify. Yet time and again, the people standing before her demonstrate why people regret taking DNA tests. Once the envelope is opened, uncertainty ends, but so does denial. The truth arrives without emotion, without bias, and without regard for how long a lie has been maintained. One recurring pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Many individuals delayed seeking the truth because they feared what it might reveal. Others relied on verbal assurances, emotional bonds, or social pressure instead of evidence. These cases reveal how misinformation spreads quietly through families, often disguised as protection or sacrifice. Over time, that misinformation becomes a burden, passed from one generation to the next, until it finally reaches the evidence stage in court. Judge Lauren Lake addresses this directly, reminding everyone present that the relationship between law and justice depends on facts, not feelings. The law does not exist to validate assumptions or reward emotional arguments. Justice, in its purest form, relies on evidence that can withstand scrutiny. In this courtroom, DNA results serve as the final authority, cutting through years of confusion in a matter of seconds. As more testimony is heard, the court examines the financial and emotional consequences of misidentified paternity. Child support obligations, strained parental bonds, and broken trust surface repeatedly. One man describes how paying child support for a child he later learns is not biologically his changed the trajectory of his life. Another explains how discovering the truth too late robbed him of the chance to form a real bond from the beginning. These accounts echo discussions often explored in platforms like the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal choices intersect with deeply personal outcomes. Judge Lake also addresses the legal principle of adverse inference in Evidence Act discussions, particularly when parties refuse testing or delay proceedings. She explains that avoiding evidence can itself influence the court's perception. Silence, denial, or refusal to cooperate often raises more questions than answers. In these cases, those who resisted testing eventually faced harsher emotional consequences than those who confronted the truth early. Another courtroom matter introduces adoption-related confusion, where records were incomplete, memories conflicted, and family members disagreed about origins. The court carefully separates legal adoption stories from assumptions passed through family narratives. Judge Lake emphasizes that adoption stories' full episodes often highlight love and commitment, but they must also respect the child's right to know their identity. Once again, DNA evidence becomes the bridge between past decisions and present reality. Throughout these proceedings, the emotional tone shifts between anger, regret, relief, and quiet acceptance. Some participants lash out, blaming others for deception or betrayal. Others internalize guilt, recognizing that fear led them to withhold the truth. Judge Lauren Lake consistently redirects the focus back to accountability, reminding everyone that children bear the heaviest cost when adults avoid responsibility. The court also confronts repeated DNA test cheating stories, where infidelity during the window of conception created irreversible damage. In these cases, cheating is not treated as gossip or moral judgment, but as a factual matter with legal implications. When multiple potential fathers exist, clarity becomes essential, not optional. The courtroom reveals how cheating introduces legal uncertainty that can follow a child for life if left unresolved. As each DNA result is read, reactions vary dramatically. Some individuals break down in relief, finally free from doubt. Others sit in stunned silence, realizing that years of belief were built on falsehoods. Judge Lake allows space for emotion but remains firm in her rulings. She reminds the courtroom that justice is not about comfort, it is about truth. The issue of Supreme Court child support principles surfaces again when Judge Lake explains how child support laws prioritize the best interest of the child, not the convenience of adults. Whether a man is biologically related or legally responsible depends on evidence, timing, and legal standards. These rulings illustrate why family courts exist, to impose structure where chaos threatens a child's stability. Throughout the cases, the judge draws attention to personal growth and recovery. Some participants express a desire to rebuild trust, seek counseling, or repair damaged relationships. These moments echo themes found in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where accountability becomes the first step toward healing. Judge Lake encourages those involved to move forward with honesty, regardless of how painful the truth may be. By now, the courtroom has transformed into a place of reckoning. Every individual present understands that once the DNA test speaks, debate ends. The truth cannot be argued away, ignored, or reshaped. This is why so many people fear the moment results are revealed. Truth changes everything: relationships, finances, self-identity, and future plans. Judge Lauren Lake concludes these proceedings by reinforcing a critical lesson. The court cannot undo the past, but it can prevent future harm by establishing truth. She urges parents to communicate honestly, partners to take responsibility for their actions, and families to stop allowing secrecy to masquerade as protection. As the next case prepares to enter the courtroom, the pattern is clear. Each story may involve different people, but the same themes repeat: doubt, denial, evidence, and truth. The courtroom remains the final destination when private lies grow too heavy to carry alone. This unfolding courtroom narrative shows that justice is not about winning or losing. It is about clarity. And in every case before Judge Lauren Lake, clarity arrives through evidence, leaving no room for illusion, only reality. As the final phase of this courtroom story unfolds, Judge Lauren Lake brings the focus back to the core purpose of the court, establishing truth so that lives can move forward with clarity instead of confusion. By this stage, it is evident that every person who entered the courtroom carried not only legal questions, but emotional weight built over years of uncertainty, secrecy, and broken trust. The courtroom has become the place where those burdens are finally confronted. Judge Lake reminds everyone that family court is not designed to shame or punish, but to resolve unanswered questions that have stalled people's lives. In each case, the evidence stage serves as the dividing line between assumption and fact. No matter how convincing a story sounds, no matter how long it has been believed, the court ultimately relies on verifiable proof. This principle reinforces the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness depends on facts rather than feelings. As more cases reach their conclusions, a clear pattern emerges. Those who delayed the truth often did so believing they were protecting someone, sometimes a child, sometimes themselves, sometimes a relationship. But the court demonstrates repeatedly that delayed truth only multiplies harm. Years of uncertainty affect identity, relationships, finances, and emotional health. Judge Lake emphasizes that the longer the truth is hidden, the more destructive its eventual revelation becomes. In one final matter, the courtroom revisits the lasting consequences of unresolved paternity disputes. Adults argue, emotions flare, and accusations resurface, but Judge Lake redirects attention to the children involved. She stresses that children should never have to grow up questioning where they belong or whether they are truly wanted. This principle lies at the heart of Supreme Court child support rulings, which exist to ensure stability and accountability regardless of personal conflict. The court also revisits how legal responsibility can differ from biological reality. Judge Lake explains that in some situations, a man may not be the biological father, yet still holds legal responsibility because of past actions, acknowledgments, or court orders. These explanations highlight the complex relationship between law and justice, showing that fairness often requires balancing science, timing, and legal precedent. As the final DNA test results are read, reactions once again reveal the emotional cost of truth. Some participants experience relief, finally free from suspicion and doubt. Others feel regret for years lost, relationships damaged, or trust broken beyond repair. These moments explain why people regret taking DNA tests, not because the truth is wrong, but because it removes the comfort of uncertainty. Judge Lauren Lake allows space for these emotions, but she consistently brings the courtroom back to accountability. She explains that the truth, once known, creates responsibility. Responsibility to the child, to oneself, and to the future. Avoiding responsibility may delay consequences, but it never eliminates them. This lesson echoes discussions often found in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where personal honesty becomes the foundation for growth. The courtroom also reflects on how infidelity complicates legal outcomes. Cheating during the window of conception is not treated as moral gossip, but as a factual issue with lasting legal impact. The repeated DNA test cheating stories presented in court illustrate how a single decision can ripple across decades, affecting multiple families and children. Judge Lake emphasizes that honesty at the earliest moment could have prevented much of the pain seen in the courtroom. As the proceedings draw closer to an end, Judge Lake addresses recovery and moving forward. She encourages participants to seek counseling, rebuild trust where possible, and focus on providing stability for the children involved. These moments align closely with Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where accountability and truth become the first steps toward healing rather than endpoints of pain. The court also revisits adoption-related misunderstandings, clarifying the difference between emotional parenting and biological identity. Judge Lake reinforces that adoption stories' full episodes often celebrate love and commitment, but they must coexist with transparency. Children deserve to know their origins, not as a rejection of those who raised them, but as a complete understanding of who they are. One of the most powerful messages delivered in this final phase is about silence. Judge Lake explains that silence can be just as damaging as lies. When questions are ignored, children internalize confusion. When doubts are dismissed, trust erodes quietly. The court exists to break that silence, even when the truth is uncomfortable. The discussion briefly touches again on adverse inference in Evidence Act principles. Judge Lake explains that refusal to participate in testing, avoidance of court proceedings, or inconsistent testimony often speaks louder than words. In a courtroom governed by evidence, avoidance becomes its own form of evidence. This reinforces the idea that cooperation with the truth often leads to better outcomes than resistance. As the courtroom quiets and the final rulings are issued, Judge Lauren Lake offers a closing reflection. She reminds everyone present that justice does not promise happiness, but it does promise clarity. Clarity allows people to stop living in doubt and start making informed decisions about their lives and relationships. By the end of this courtroom journey, it becomes unmistakably clear that DNA tests are not merely medical procedures. They are turning points. They redefine families, reshape identities, and force accountability where uncertainty once lived. The court serves as the stage where these transformations occur, guided by evidence, law, and a commitment to fairness. This final chapter reinforces that the courtroom is not where stories begin, but where they finally stop running from the truth. Every person who stood before Judge Lauren Lake leaves changed, carrying answers they may have feared but ultimately needed. Some leave with peace, others with regret, but none leave without clarity. In the end, this courtroom story proves a single, unshakable truth. When evidence speaks, denial ends. The truth changes everything, not because it destroys lives, but because it gives them a chance to move forward honestly.